We now return to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute, the radio show discussing the honest truth about Illinois policy and politics. Here's AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with Michael Lucci. He's Vice President of Policy at the Illinois Policy Institute. And Michael, on this show, a few weeks back, interviewed Steve Brown, who's Mike Madigan's longtime spokesman, the House Speaker's longtime spokesman, and we talked about the exodus of people from Illinois. We're routinely competing with New Jersey on an annualized basis for most out-migration from Illinois to other states. And he said, no, I go downtown, I see people going to work, I see people on mass transit, and by Steve Brown kind of sizing it up, eyeing it up, he thinks it's fine. We're not seeing an out-migration according to Steve Brown's first-person perspective, but the statistics tell a bit of a different story than Steve Brown, don't they?
Yes, they do. Illinois is actually losing people at the fastest rate in the history of Illinois. So when you count the people who leave and you count the people who move into Illinois, that trade-off loss is 105,000 people per year in the most recent year of data. So that's a dramatic acceleration from where we were in previous years, where we were also losing people, but never this quickly. And Mr. Brown has been very interesting in how he's evolved on the topic. When data comes out saying Illinoisans are leaving for Texas and Indiana, he says, we don't know why they're leaving. When polls come out that say Illinoisans are leaving because of tax and job issues, he says, well, we don't know where they're going. So he's always ignorant on some part of the puzzle. He's never able to really piece it all together and figure out what's going on. There's always some piece of the puzzle that's missing in Steve Brown's mind.
Well, let's see if we can elucidate this topic for Steve Brown so we can cut and send him this segment of the show to help him understand what's happening and why it's happening. And to help us do that, we're joined by Scott Moody, the CEO of the Granite Institute and a senior fellow at the Illinois Policy Institute. He has a new report that may answer some of those queries that befuddle Steve Brown. Scott, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So why are people leaving Illinois, and where are they going? We want to help the Speaker's office understand what's happening under their leadership.
Well, the great thing about this study is we're using hard IRS data, which allows us to see where people are going, how much income they're taking with them. And unlike other types of surveys, it's a lot less prone to error than other types of measurements. So we really like to use this data when examining migration. Unfortunately, it does not bring good news to the state of Illinois. Between 1995 and 2013, Illinois has lost over almost 500,000 tax-paying households, and that represents over 1 million people taking with them almost $50 billion in income. And so that's really important because that income would have been sloshing around Illinois' economy, not only boosting incomes of residents, but also boosting government coffers during that time span as well.
And Scott, how much would you say, how much does your study say we've lost in tax revenue due to out-migration over the time period you looked at?
Well, we've estimated that income would have generated $8 billion in additional tax revenue each and every year. But keep in mind that these numbers are compounded over that time frame. When somebody leaves and never returns, it's as if you've permanently pulled out that part of the economy. And when you compound both the income and tax figures, you're looking at a loss of income of over $450 billion, which would have resulted in nearly $75 billion in additional tax payments. That would have done a lot to help budget deficits over that time period.
And, I'd say so. And where are they going, and why are they going there?
Well, not surprisingly, the states that Illinois are losing people to are states like Florida, Indiana, Texas, Wisconsin, and Arizona. Of course, Florida and Texas are the two most problematic. They're also in the top three because those states have no income tax. They also don't have an estate tax and the right to work states. So when you look at the data, you're beginning to see a pattern of the policy issues or differences between the states, and that's something that policymakers in Illinois really need to take to heart.
Well, it's interesting, too, because of those 5 states, as you mentioned, you can't just dismiss to say, well, sure, it's the cold winters in Illinois and Chicago, so people are leaving for Florida and Arizona. But the winters are very similar in Wisconsin and Indiana, so it's not just barometric pressure or snowfall that is pushing people out of Illinois. If they're moving to Indiana or Wisconsin, there's got to be something else in play.
Well, that's exactly right. And we looked at when we look at the migration patterns, we've looked at other factors such as job growth, for example. And job growth was a big predictor for where folks were moving to. And, of course, we know in recent years that your neighboring states of Wisconsin, Indiana have become right-to-work states. So they're going to turn into job-creating machines because we've seen that historically in right-to-work states. And that's going to be the attractive factor is jobs.
And that's quite a bit already underway with Indiana and also with Wisconsin. Between right to work and a number of other things they're doing, they are becoming job machines. Scott, Illinois in some ways reminds me of a cable company that's losing customers, so they keep raising rates on their remaining customer base, and then that remaining base says, this isn't a good deal for us, we're going to continue moving. What would it take for Illinois to actually turn the corner on this to rein in the massive out-migration losses and turn to a state that people consider moving to rather than a state that people move from?
Well, first and foremost, you got to look at the tax situation. When you know you're losing people to Florida and Texas, now that doesn't necessarily mean you have to obviously eliminate your income tax right out of the gate. The estate tax, for example, is a major driver, major difference between the states. It didn't used to always be that way. The estate tax was pretty much set by federal law. Everybody had the same estate tax. But now, because of the Bush tax cuts, states can now compete on the estate tax. And that's really important because one thing we tend to forget, and the great thing about this taxpayer data, is that this is only measuring income. It does not measure assets. So when those folks are moving to Florida and Texas and they wait till they move to cash out business assets or personal assets, the state of Illinois is losing out not only on capital gains, but also when those folks pass on, they're also going to lose out on that estate tax revenue on those assets as well. So these are very conservative estimates in this study, given that Florida and Texas are your two main competitors.
I'll tell you another interesting data point from your study that that caught my attention, and we're talking to Scott Moody, who's the CEO of the Granite Institute and a senior fellow at the Illinois Policy Institute, about his Illinois out-migration study. But this data point, the average income of out-migrants was $66,745 in 2015. So one of the other things here, people leaving for Florida or Texas where they don't have a state income tax, that's these rich fat cats who don't want to pay their fair share. Well, no, it's actually decidedly middle-income families that are fleeing, it appears, based on that data point alone.
That's right. I mean, the vast majority of this migration is, in fact, middle-class people looking for greener pastures, whether that's, jobs, for example. We know that since the Great Recession, for example, that Florida and Texas are predominantly the largest generators of jobs in the entire country. So that, by definition, if you're looking for a job, you're going to be looking at those two states. But also, when it comes to losses to state government, you do have to consider those high-income individuals because those are being taxed at the highest rates and have the greatest assets, and they're also your job generators. As you move up the income scale, you're looking at higher and higher proportions of business income that represent their tax returns. So by losing your entrepreneurs, you're also losing your future ability to even create jobs to keep the middle class in Illinois.
And speaking of the future, Scott, some of the recent data, the enriched data that I know that you've been working on is actually showing the age groups of people who leave Illinois. And the polling data that's come out recently also looks at age groups. And I was shocked to find that it's not retirees. The group leaving fastest is the millennial generation, 34 and younger. The next fastest group of people leaving the state are the 35 to 44-year-olds. So we're talking about prime working age adults. How will that affect the long term of Illinois' finances, and what might you think is driving those younger working age people specifically?
Well, exactly. These are the folks looking for either their first job or they're looking to advance in, their first starter job. They're looking to move up the economic ladder. And I think that just reinforces the point that they have to go where the jobs are, and they're not in Illinois. But we have to also be concerned about the longer-term demographic impact that that's going to have. By losing, obviously, your younger generations, you're also short-circuiting your ability to have future generations of residents. And that's something to be concerned about, as we already know the baby boomers are aging. I live in New England, for example, which is ground zero in America for a new phenomenon being called demographic winter. And in Maine, the labor force is already shrinking year over year simply because there are too few young people left in the state to maintain the population level. You do not want that to come to Illinois, because that right there is going to become an inhibitor or a ceiling on any future growth in the state.
All right. He is Scott Moody, the CEO of the Granite Institute, a senior fellow at the Illinois Policy Institute. Scott, thanks for joining us. Fascinating study. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.